Good morning and welcome to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. And now, Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's edition of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell, your weekly financial tips show as we talk mostly retirement planning, kind of all about just how do you make some smart money choices, how do you stay best informed with our guest today, as always, Scott Wardell, and he has a special guest, Ed, with us in studio. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing great, and I'm really thankful that Ed could join us here. I have Ed Del Maro on with us this morning, and Ed has actually been on the show before, Steph, and he has such a great story. I just really never tire of it, and it's so full of experience and wisdom that I just, I want to give a lot of time here to Ed to really tell us a little bit about, what he's learned from some of his experiences.
Ed, he just called you wise. Now you have some, no pressure now. We're expecting wisdom for Ed today.
Determined. Determined. Well, and Ed is from Burnsville, Minnesota. I refer to him as one of the patriarchs over there. He's very involved with the community, and Ed's been retired for a number of years, and so his involvement is pretty much volunteer involvement, but he's got a great story, and I want our listeners to really get acquainted with you, Ed, first of all. So first of all, thank you for being on the show again with us, because I really, really enjoy having you here, and thank you for sharing your story. So tell us a little bit, go all the way back, Ed, if you would, a little bit to your childhood and where you grew up, because I think people getting to know you will start to understand a little bit more about how you make decisions based on where you came from.
All right. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me again. Well, I grew up in a small farm town in Ohio, Hudson, Ohio. Grew up on the farm, and we were part-time farmers. My grandpa and my dad had city jobs, too, in factories. So I love the farm as far as the countryside, but I was not a farmer at heart. So very early in my life, I knew that was not going to be my destiny. And as a teenager, I got a job in town at our department store and discovered the world of air conditioning. So I was kind of a wimpy farmer.
Well, but you really suffered from some allergy problems.
I did, a lot of allergy problems, and I found out in the air conditioning that was all tempered. And plus, I'm very social, and I liked the interface with people, and I knew that, all right, whatever my career is going to be in life, it's going to be with people, not with cornfields.
Well, and there's a lot of folks today that are going to be facing 105 degrees outdoors and with the heat index throughout, the state.
Right.
Well, when you say fell in love with air conditioning, they're going to say, well, who hasn't?
Not surprising, yeah.
But I have a great respect for the farm life and the work that those people do, because I experienced it, and I've never forgotten that. And when I see food on the table and say grace, I'm thanking them too. So I don't ever want this to sound like I'm putting down
Well, because of your background and so many people really of your generation who actually have had some farm experience, they know where breakfast comes from. One of my favorite quotes is Aldo Leopold, who wrote the book A Sand County Almanac. He says, what the danger of not owning a farm is? You start to think that breakfast comes from the grocery store.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Exactly.
True.
So, but
True.
more about your story.
All right. So I wasn't real sure while I was 16 working in that store, and I wasn't sure where that was going to lead me. But in high school, there was a girl that I had a crush on, and never was able to be in a class with her. And finally, as a senior, I had an extra class, and I thought, how can I somehow get in there? The only class that matched up on schedules was a shorthand class. So I
Really?
promptly signed up and promptly ended up in the principal's office and said,
Because what are you doing, huh?
we know why you're in shorthand class. And I said, yes, sir, to learn
Did they know
short.
specifically or just generally?
Oh, they pretty well knew. And I said, well, to learn shorthand. And he said,
Yeah.
we will be watching that you do that.
Right.
So I thought, oh, I have to learn shorthand or they're going to boot me out. So I did, and it was kind of a joke. I learned it well and got a good grade and thought, well, there's useless information. And after high school, when I was out looking for a job, I kept hearing about this wonderful job at the railroad that no one seemed to be qualified for. And finally, one day I asked the question, why is no one qualified? And they said, well, it has to be a male and he has to know shorthand.
Wow.
And that was because it was a job, a clerical job to travel on the presidential cars that had bedrooms.
Right.
And in that day and age, it would be have been totally inappropriate for a young lady to be traveling on a business car
Sure.
with bedrooms with the executives. So I got that job, and it was the key to a 42-year career with the railroad.
It opened up that first door for you.
Hired in as a clerk typist and retired as a vice president of the company.
Wow.
So I had you might say I got on the train and had a wonderful ride.
And a woman was to blame all the while.
That's
Exactly.
right.
You know, and isn't life just so full of those kinds of circumstances where you're just like, you know, happen to be in the right place in the right time? I mean, really, how many people could have even been male and known shorthand in that period of time? I mean, I
Right.
just can't even imagine.
No, I think I was the first guy that ever took shorthand.
It was like
at
writing
our
a
school.
job description nobody could fill.
But it was a good lesson, and I taught my 3 daughters that also, that as you go along in life, learn anything that you have the opportunity to learn, because you never know when that's tucked away that it's going to suddenly become the key to open a door for opportunity.
Right, right. And, you know, I'm sure we have listeners this morning, guys like you and I that, you know, there's a whole bunch of guys that I know, including myself, that signed up for a home ec class to do the very thing you did. Now, I have to admit it didn't lead me to the same place. But, you know, it was like a little suspicious. Well, why are you and your 2 best buddies signed up for a home ec class?
Exactly. So.
Yeah. So at any rate, so tell us just a little bit more about your career, and then I want to get into a little discussion about your family. So you gave us a real quick synopsis, but you obviously took the job with the railroad. You're doing shorthand, and take us from that beginning stage there.
I wasn't on the trains much. That was just a prerequisite that if there was occasion that they needed a clerk on the business cars, I'd be available to go. So mainly I was in the office on the phone, being the interface with the customers of the railroad, people calling in to track their carloads of lumber, freight, raw goods, finished goods. And I found out that I was very good on the telephone and that rapport. And it was before the days of computers. So what would happen is every yard on the railroad would daily take a manual list of the cars and mimeograph them. There was no copy machines. Mail them. So there was this like 3 or 4 day delay before you even knew where the stuff was moving. And I figured out a system. We had wide windowsills to put these stacks of yard consists on the windowsills in the room in the same order that our railroad was geographically. And I could quickly, if someone told me they shipped a car on a given day, I could run to the window where I thought it would be X number of days later.
Right.
And it was magically worked. And
So you basically invented your system to help support your work.
right.
Yeah.
And later when computers came, I suddenly realized that that was a form of computer programming.
Sure.
Because
Systemization.
and so I found computers to be very, very user-friendly to me. I just always pictured little, and still do, little people in there that I'm giving orders
that
to.
are running to the windowsill.
Run and get me this file and
Right.
put it together with that one and bring me the,
The people at Intel should be so smart.
So that kind of gave me the opportunity to be noticed by the customers. And when an opportunity came for a field sales job,
Right.
it was offered to me. So then I was out knocking on doors, meeting face to face.
Okay, so you went from the really more of an administrative role to more of a sales role.
Exactly.
Okay, but you're still not in a vice president role, so take us the next step there.
So there's many steps in the railroad. I was an office manager, and then I became a junior salesperson. And then they kind of changed the title. There wasn't much money with it, but it was a promotion to commercial agent.
Commercial agent.
Which got
okay.
new business cards, so it opened a few more doors.
Sure.
And then I became a district manager, and finally an area manager, which then that's where the big promotions start. That's where you're supervising, a huge segment of the nation, both U.S. and Canada. And then I became an assistant vice president, and finally into the vice president of sales position.
Okay, and then when did you move to Minnesota? Because this started in Ohio, and somehow you found your way here.
Started in Cleveland, Ohio. I was then transferred to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. From there to back to the Detroit area as head of the office. From there to Appleton, Wisconsin. And then from Appleton to Minneapolis in 1982, which I knew was the home office and would be the end of this bouncing around.
Okay, good.
And I was happy because the girls were getting into age of junior high and high school. I knew we could stay put.
Okay, well, speaking of the girls, tell us a little bit about your family.
I was a single salesman until age 30 when suddenly I met a young lady named Linda, and knew immediately that my single days were over.
You'd been caught.
I had, and I think I made the lucky catch.
Yeah.
And we were happily married for 41 years, and I'll get back to that.
Sure.
And we have 3 daughters.
Yeah.
And they all live in the area. I have 8 grandchildren.
And they all live in the area as well.
All close together. Yeah. And unfortunately, in 2005, my beautiful, seemingly healthy wife started complaining of leg pains. And after many, many gyrations of University of Minnesota, Mayo Clinic, all else, it was determined to be ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yes.
And 2 years later, 2007, I lost her.
Right. So let's get into that just a little bit, Ed, because really our topic of today, we're talking about, of course, about retirement, but we're also talking about those dilemmas and challenges that face us during retirement. And so here you're coming off of what most people would look at as really a fantastic career. It's sort of the American dream, frankly.
Absolutely.
Farm boy, gets a big opportunity, goes on and really does great things, works for the railroad, and then you retire, and you've got this great retirement ahead of you. And one of the things I do happen to know about both you and Linda is that you loved to dance, and you were, you'd go out and do these things, and then you started to see these things that were happening with her. So tell us how you personally face this dilemma, and then we're going to, right after our break, we're going to talk a little bit about how you manage that risk with long-term care and some of those things. Okay?
Well, when I first retired, by the way, Linda was 9 years younger than me.
Right.
So in my mind, doing my planning, I was always thinking, well, I'll be gone before her. I have to look out for Linda. On the other hand, I'd look the other way and say, but there's longevity in my family. My grandparents, my parents all lived to be well into their 90s.
Sure.
So I kind of...
not so much on her side.
Not so much on her side. So I kind of had to balance things and saying, but what if, make sure we're both okay.
Have plan A and plan B, all both ready to go.
And so I planned that way with the retirements and with the insurance so that either one of us would be okay if anything happened.
Sure.
And it brings true meaning. We all say it at the altar, and I don't think we get it when we're young.
Sure.
We think it's forever, but it's until death do us part.
Right.
And so you kind of have to keep that in mind when you're planning it's inevitable. And, you can read back as long as you want and no one ever escaped it. People don't like to talk about it, but you have to recognize it and plan accordingly.
Yeah, it doesn't do you any good to just avoid the whole topic.
It does not.
You've got to come right in. So you started to notice some things with Linda. How long did it take you to figure out what it was she was facing?
It probably maybe a year before I would just notice very subtle things. And even dancing, she'd trip and we'd think, well, it's a dance floor or something.
Sure.
And you just excuse it.
Yep.
And then suddenly I just sort of started wondering. And I thought, then you're getting older. And I thought, she probably sees the same things in me, that I'm not as agile as I used to be. So I really there was nothing to be concerned about. in my mind.
Sure.
Until suddenly she was having foot and leg pains, and they couldn't identify it.
Right, right. Okay. Well, good. Well, we're going to take just a really quick break
Yeah.
here, but at the end, when we come back from a break, we're going to hear more about Ed's story and how you personally managed this with Linda, and then some of the help that you got from your really great planning and having some long-term care in place.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, we'll
sounds good.
transition a bit from Ed's really, I think, personal and empowering story and talk about kind of the nitty-gritty of what do you do in terms of long-term care planning on Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Thanks for tuning in this week. Be right back.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on Financial Strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on Financial Strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing.
Welcome back to Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Thanks for tuning in today. Our guest in studio, Ed, we've been hearing a little bit about his story, his, like you said, the American dream kind of life, married a wonderful woman, and then faced some challenges kind of at the start of his retirement. And we want to kind of pick back up there and transition. I know, Scott, you want to hear a little bit from him and then transition into long-term care planning. What do you do?
So Ed was just telling us he'd retired in 95, and actually kind of semi-retired. He did some consulting and some things. And then about 4 years later, he fully retired. And then you and Linda are having this great retirement. 2005, you find out that she's got ALS.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that progression, the personal part, and then we'll get really into the details of the long-term care that you had to provide.
I'll back up a little bit. In planning for the retirement and the early years of retirement, trying to balance this as to who's going to outlive whom.
Right.
We started talking about long-term care insurance, thinking, and I was 68 at the time.
Right.
And we made inquiries, and they said, you're kind of old to be looking at long-term care insurance.
I disagree, but go ahead.
And it's much more popular now than it was then.
And you said she's 9 years younger. Yeah, so she would have been 59.
So they said for her it'd be a breeze, but for me I'd need a physical.
Sure.
And luckily I was in perfect health, taking no medications, and they came back to me and said, wow, you passed it with flying colors.
Sure.
So we purchased the long-term care insurance thinking that's nice. I hope we never need it.
Yep.
Then came along the ALS.
Right.
And we're in a 2-story colonial home where we raised our family. We love the home, and the first thing I'm thinking is we're not going to be able to live here for long. And I contacted finally my insurance company, and I then realized the true value of long-term care insurance.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about how the insurance kicked in and what things that it was taking care of for
They
you.
first admonished me for not having called them sooner.
Really?
And it's one of these things that slowly progressed, and one day you finally say, oh, that's probably why we have that policy.
Yeah.
And found out that it just provided, I was the primary caregiver, and it served me as well as it served her, because I could have, cleaning lady in every day if we needed that. We didn't need that, but I could. I could have people coming to do, assisting Linda with personal things, even have her hairdresser come or manicurist come to keep life as normal as it can be.
Yeah.
We needed a lift for the bathtub. That was covered. They put in a stair lift for us. So
stair lift, a little elevator to take you.
She could just sit down and ride upstairs, and when she got upstairs, we had another walker waiting. She could get around with a walker. But it helped us keep life as normal as it could be under the circumstances.
And that was all covered through your long-term care insurance?
It was covered through the long-term care, and they could not have been more respectful and more helpful and more caring to help us stay in that home, and we did right up until the final day.
Right. Wow. So, and you were saying earlier you were like 68 when you applied, right?
Yes.
So Linda was actually like 59 or
Yes.
right in there at the time.
Correct.
Yep. And so when you looked at it, were you thinking mostly the financial part, but gosh, this could be really costly if we needed this, or how did you actually approach it?
Because I was 9 years older, I figured she'd be the one taking care of me.
Yeah.
And she was 9 years younger, and I thought, I do not want that part of her life to be entirely taking care of me. I wanted her to be taking care of me, but not to be burdened by it.
Right.
And to have this safety net, or parachute, you might say,
Sure.
that would make it as easy as possible for that to be done.
Yep.
And
then when you looked at it, I'm sure part of it was like, gosh, this could be really expensive if she had to pay for it out of cash flow.
Absolutely, and I didn't want her to use up our entire savings
Right.
for my final days. And I just can't say enough about it. I don't think we realized the true impact of what we were doing until the day came that we needed it.
Right. Very good.
Interesting to hear from Ed his personal perspective of using long-term care. Scott, from your perspective, do you think there are misconceptions people have, myths about long-term care? And if so, what are they?
Well, I think a couple of them that we run into all the time. First of all, long-term care is very heavily associated with nursing home care in terms of people's perception of it. Ed's telling a story about really home health care. And the last data that I read, it said that 85% of the claims for on long-term care are now home health care. So I've had people say to me, well, gosh, I don't even want to go to a nursing home. And first of all, there's some really great care facilities out there.
Yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of myth about what kind of care is out there, because I think there's really good care available for folks. Having said that, if 85% of the claims are for home health care, you should really think of it more as that kind of a policy. And that's exactly what you had, Ed.
Exactly.
Was really home health care. So that's number one. The other thing is people think, well, my kids will take care of me. Well, I think that's really, it's time to stop and think about that for a moment and think of how busy your kids are. Think of their lives, think of their families. Ed, I know you think of that all the
Absolutely.
time because, sometimes I've seen you try and organize the family for an event, and gosh, they've got so many things going. It is not all that easy.
Right.
And I've been in that situation as well, providing care for my mom in a rotation with my brothers and sisters. And boy, it is really hard to get all that organized. And it's not that family members are unwilling to. It's just that you have to really, really assess what impact you're going to have on their lives. And you don't know the degree to which your care might be needed. So in your case, Ed, with Linda, I mean, how much, first of all, think of the things that Ed just said that were provided for him. And you say, well, my kids will take care of me. Really? Your kid's going to come in and put a lift in the bathtub? Your kids are going to put an elevator in on your stairway to, get, unlikely,
right.
Very much so. So
well, and the cost associated with that, then somebody has to bear that, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And there are a lot of costs associated, whether it's home health care or it's nursing care, or skilled nursing care, assisted living. So the main myths are those, and then I think along with the myths, it's really a perception, and guys especially, really don't want to talk about this. Ed said it earlier. It's not stuff you want to talk about, but it doesn't help to put it aside. It really doesn't.
Yeah,
So,
it's inevitable, like you said.
Part of
Right.
it with me,
No, go
part
right
of it
ahead.
with me was I never had to face that with my parents. They were exceptional. They were married 72 years and
Wow.
lived independently in their home right up until a year before my mother died. And so I saw all of my friends going through all kinds of things trying to take care of elderly parents.
Right.
And I thought, gosh, I never had to do that. And I don't want my girls to have to do that. So that's part of what pointed us toward the long-term care also.
Well, and so much better for you to have that, be able to have a broader perspective, because as Steph asked the question about myths, one of the things that we encounter all the time is people say, well, you know, my folks never needed it, and so I don't figure that I'm going to need it either. So they take the same situation and make it, you know, as though they're not going to. Your folks didn't need it, but boy, did not you personally, in a way you personally, but need it for Linda's care for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed Del Moro is our guest in studio today, Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Talking about long-term care insurance, Scott, we know there were some changes a few years ago.
Yeah, 4 years ago.
Yeah. What are those, and you know, from you, and then also, Ed, how did you manage the risks associated with those changes?
Well, and Ed might not have actually faced the risks associated with those changes, because what happened here in the state of Minnesota, many states have adopted what's called the partnership rule. And it changed a little bit how the state participates in potentially providing care. So let me just tell you the main difference, and we've got a brochure that we can send out to people that have specific questions about this. But in the past, as people are fairly well aware, is that if you were providing care for someone and you were doing it out of your pocket and out of your savings, and Ed said one of the reasons he took out long-term care was he didn't want, you know, Linda actually to go through all of the savings if he were the one that needed the care. And then what happened in the past is you'd go through pretty much all of your savings. They'd allow you to keep a small portion back for yourself. Then the county would kick in and start to provide that care and start to pay for some of that care. Not necessarily home health care, but to a certain degree that they would do that. But here's what happened with Minnesota Partnership. See, so what we had to do, those of us that are in the industry and helping people plan for these things, is actually encourage people to take fairly large policies, because the way the rules worked is if you went through all the proceeds provided by that policy and you used it up, they could still march through all of your savings and take it as well. Ooh. Yeah, so you're like, wow, I paid all those premiums, and so that encouraged us to actually offer people fairly large policies. Well, what happened when this Minnesota Partnership was passed here is they said, well, what, and then I'm going to oversimplify this, but basically the amount of money in the policy is the amount of money in your estate that you get to protect. So let's say the cap on your policy was $200,000. That meant that $200,000 could be saved and protected, and although they could march through the rest of your savings, they had to allow you to keep that portion. And so what happened then is you could say, well, you know, we don't have to have these gigantic policies, because as long as we save enough in reserve. And when we get to the free offer today, I'm going to offer the people who call in this frequently asked questions about the partnership plan, because it is important, if you're doing your homework on this, to understand how that is different. And one of the ways it's different is possibly people don't need quite the gigantic policies that they got in the past. And what does that mean? It may, I emphasize, it may mean that they're going to pay a lower premium because they don't have to get quite as much of a policy.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's pause. How's that sound?
Okay, absolutely.
We'll come back. We're talking long-term care planning, financial strategies with Scott Wardell, our guest today in studio, Ed Del Moro. We'll be back right after this.
Nearly 3 million members look to Thrivent Financial for Lutherans to help them achieve their financial goal. Nearly 3 million people know that Thrivent Financial is committed to excellence in financial services and caring for others. Get to know Thrivent Financial and the quality of products and services they can offer you. In West Central Minnesota, your representatives to help you with your financial needs are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. Registered representatives for securities offered through Thrivent Investment Management Incorporated, member FINRA and SIPC.
Welcome back. Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Thanks for tuning in this week. We're talking a bit about long-term care planning, hearing about or from special guest Ed Del Moro in studio about his story and kind of how he planned for unexpected events in his life with his wife. Before we kind of dive back into things, though, every week, Scott, you have a special offer. What do you
Absolutely.
have this
well,
week?
I've got actually a couple things. First of all, if anyone wants to really do any online searches for long-term care and do their homework, if you type in long-term care real-life stories, you're going to hear some videos. You're going to hear some stories like Ed's if you want to hear, how it has helped and provided care for other people. So that I found that to be kind of an interesting spot. But then I have 3 parts to today's offer, so I really want people to make that phone call, and we'll send this out to them immediately. And again, the number is 952-400-0545. And give us a call there, or at some of the other cities that are carrying our show. And by the way, I really appreciate our new listeners and we have them in a variety of communities right now, but you can call this number and we'll send it to you as well. So it is 952-400-0545. But here are the 3 things that we're going to send out. Frequently asked questions for the partnership plan. A moment ago we were talking about the partnership plan and how that works. That's number 1. Number 2, long-term care fact sheet. Now this one is put out by Genworth, which is one of the country's leading long-term care providers. And then another one by Genworth, which is called Long-Term Care is About the Family. And I think Ed's smiling here because he knows that firsthand.
Yeah.
And so those 3 things we'll put in a packet. So if you call that number and you're listening today, then you're going to get our voicemail. And on that voice message, make sure you leave us your name and your address so that we've got a good address to mail this to you. We should get it out in the mail on Monday or Tuesday. You should have it by Wednesday. And don't put it off. Ed did his homework. And that's really one of the neat parts of your story is, Ed, you've got the planning gene. You look ahead. You've told me before how you and Linda would talk about these things, and communication is everything. And so, people, do your homework, do your investigation. Don't let the myths associated with it. People say all the time, oh, I've heard it's so expensive. That, folks, is all about design. There's a lot of ways to design these things, and they do not have to be, maybe as high as what you have heard. So,
Sure.
But Ed, again, thank you for being on the show with us here today. We've been talking about your dilemma with long-term care. You had this spectacular retirement with Linda. Then you hit this crisis, and you cared for her. And then, tell us a little bit about your moving on after you lost Linda and how reaching out to the community turned out to be, one of the things that helped.
Part of that I have to thank Linda for, because we had this agreement in our marriage. It used to be a little joke I would tell her that when we got married, we agreed that I'd make all the major decisions and she'd handle all the small ones. And she agreed to it, and we had a wonderful marriage, and somehow there were never any big decisions. But it worked really well.
So you didn't have to make any.
I never had to. I know. It was wonderful. But after I retired, I started complaining about Burnsville, because all she ever heard about was my hometown in Ohio that had this and had that. And Burnsville doesn't have a downtown, and we didn't have holiday lighting. And very quietly one day she said, well, are you getting involved, or are we moving?
Really?
And I had to ponder that a little bit, like, oh, okay, don't just sit around and complain.
Yes, stop the whining.
And I did start volunteering in the city, and there was a program going on then to develop a downtown area.
Sure.
And to possibly get holiday lighting, which has been my project for 13 years now.
Right.
But so I got into that before Linda's illness, and then when she got ill, I was ready to drop out of all the committees that I was on.
Sure.
And those people were very wise. They said, no, you have email. We'll keep you informed with minutes. And so I did that.
So you stayed connected, but
stayed
not quite as much time.
And my daughters would come and say, why don't you go to the luncheon, or why don't you,
Sure.
So I was involved, but not to the extent that I had been. So after Linda was gone, then it probably was much easier for me to ease back into things because I'd get a meeting notice and think, well, they've been really nice. I probably should go. It didn't feel like it.
Right.
But once I got out of the house and got in the car, I was fine.
So starting early was really key to being able to continue.
Right.
Yeah.
So and same way with retirement. Don't just wait until you retire and then say, now what am I going to do?
Oh, boy.
Start doing some planning and finding some things you like to do. And the nice part about retirement is if you find out you don't like to do that, you don't got to do it.
Right. You can switch.
You can switch.
Right.
Yeah, so try many
Find
things.
something else.
Sure.
Absolutely. Well, this is great. So those connections then that you made, how did they really help you get through this particular time? And what I heard you say is, although your connections might not have been quite as heavy or as strong during the time when Linda was ill, you maintained them.
Absolutely. And I found out as I got back out into the community that people were very, very interested in this journey we had been on.
Right.
Long-term care insurance, how'd you care for it? Having people tell me, oh my gosh, I felt so good when I walked into, Chianti Grill or a restaurant and saw you sitting there. And they're all realizing that in a blink of an eye, they could be in my position. And I think it actually, I kind of found a new little ministry in a way to say to people, okay, it is okay to talk about it.
Right.
And you should talk about it. And not only with me, talk about it between each other,
Right, right. We've had a couple of shows that are really focused on communication, and between spouses especially. And I know Linda and you had, as you have relayed to me, really a lot of those conversations, whether it's about long-term care or retiring or investments, all of those things.
We did.
Yeah. So that's absolutely wonderful. Then after Linda was gone, then tell us a little bit about your involvement. So how did that segue? Because, let's face the facts is, losing the love of your life, you could have gone in a hole and cried through the rest of your retirement.
And those thoughts are there, but my mind works a little different. One day I happened to think, I had 41 years of a wonderful marriage. If everyone could have a marriage like that, there'd be no divorces.
Sure.
And I thought, so I can either sit here and say, poor me, or I can say, thank you, God. Some people don't get one day of what we had 41 years of.
What a refreshing way to look at it.
And it gave me a new outlook, and I got out and thought, my dad, when he was in his 90s, always said, after my mother died, he'd be going places, and he'd say, I loved your mother dearly, but she's gone, and I'm not, and life is a gift. If you're alive, live.
Right.
So I've tried to follow that, and doing this volunteer work, I thought I was giving to the community. I've gotten so much back that there is no way in the world I even feel like I'm giving.
Right. Wonderful. And then, of course, having all three of your girls close by.
Very supportive, and 3 son-in-laws that are like sons to me.
Wonderful.
And they particularly, right after Linda's death, were very, very attentive, and dinner invitations and going here to the point where I had to then realize at one point, like, it's okay to say no.
Yeah. Sure, of course.
But so that was I had a really good support system is
Sure.
what I'm getting
That is
at.
absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, in the end, I mean, this all ties back to the fact that you were able to plan ahead and purchase this long-term care insurance. But we joked earlier that you got it at age 68. Thankfully,
Right.
you were in really great health.
Exactly.
But is there a good age, Scott? Do you recommend 50? When should people start looking at long-term care insurance?
Yeah, there is, and I also want to talk about for a moment how they might not have to get the whole thing done at once.
Okay.
Because I think what makes people reluctant is they look at it and they say, gosh, the 50-year-olds feel like long-term care. Are you kidding? I'm not old enough to take care of that. But it is a product that is age-based in terms of how the premium is set. And you don't know when you might become uninsurable. So I'll tell you who wants long-term care the most. People who can't get it. So people who say, oh my gosh, I have this disease, I have this malady, whatever it is, I'm probably going to need some care along the way. They usually cannot get it. So you want to get it while you're healthy. And I really encourage people, once they hit that 50 mark, to start doing their homework. Now, oftentimes they don't actually take the policy out until they're 52, 55, right in that, but they're still getting, a much lower premium than they would as Ed did when he was 68. Because
Right.
that's when, but you can design them in such a way that they are not necessarily out of touch relative to the cost, or out of reach, I should say.
That's right.
Even at that age, as Ed found out for himself. So I'd say do your homework early, and look at it in your 50s. And the second part that I was starting to say is, people think, well, I got to get the whole thing right now. Now, it's interesting. People who buy life insurance, which is almost everyone, rarely get the whole package at once. They rarely say, well, I have one life insurance policy, and it's the policy that's going to last me my whole life, because things change along life's path, and their income goes up, they add a kid to the family, and they often then change the amount of coverage that they have. And I think it would be an advantage to people to think about long-term care in the same way. So at your 50s, you may want to buy your base policy. And I'm not saying this for everybody, because some people say, I've got the ability to do it all right now, and that's fine. But then you're covered at that base level, and then at some point in the future, when you start to get a little closer to retirement, you might say, I'm not sure that's quite enough. I worked with two couples just this last week on how we fill the gap that they've got in their long-term care situation, because they did the very thing we're talking about. They bought almost a minimal policy, honestly, to have something in play, and now they need more. And the good news is today there's a lot more ways to get long-term care coverage than there was in the past, and they're combination products. So they're products that combine long-term care with, let's say, an annuity, or combine long-term care with life insurance and some of these other kinds of ways, because, I would say the other big reluctance people have is, what if I pay those premiums all those years and I never use it? So the companies have been pretty creative that design these things to say, well, here's a way that you can actually get something back from it. But it's every single policy is different in those combinations. I'm just saying there's a lot of options that are available for people out there.
Now, you mentioned the people that tend to most desire long-term care insurance are those that suddenly need it and maybe can't get it. They're older and they can't care for themselves, they're sick, whatever it may be. Those are the main reasons you think of for buying long-term care insurance. Or are there other reasons that people choose to invest?
I would put it simply like this. The three main reasons that people get long-term care, the first one is pretty much financial. They don't want to impoverish a spouse. Ed said it earlier. Said, I didn't want to go through all the savings and leave my spouse with very, very little. So that's probably the number one thing that people, have on their mind. The second thing is to preserve their overall estate. People work really hard for their money. They grow their estate, and most want to say, I don't want it to all go. I want it to go to my heirs. So next generation kind of planning. And the third thing, which is a little less obvious, and I challenge people to think about, and that is to provide a respite to the caregiver. And Ed, you were the caregiver. What kind of a respite did you need?
You really need it. You don't realize it's like a backpack, and you keep throwing responsibilities into it.
Yep.
And you're carrying it around, and it was a godsend for me, because when I triggered it and at first thought, well, I don't need much help.
Right.
Then I realized I did, because once I started getting help, I realized how stressed I was and what I was trying to be all things to, run a house, be a full-time caregiver, and I knew how important to preserve my health was.
Right.
I thought if something happens to me, we're in big trouble.
How many times have we either known someone or heard the story about someone who's providing care for a spouse, and it turns out that the caregiver, gets ill and dies before the person who's getting, who's receiving the care, because it's both the stress, as you talked about, but the emotional stress and the physical stress. Oftentimes, that turns out to be the big issue. I've sat down with a lot of folks who said, gosh, we were so worried about mom, but then we lost dad, in the process, or vice versa, depending upon, but it wasn't what they expected, because that person providing the care, the caregiver, really gets run down. So those are the three things, is, protect the income so you don't impoverish the spouse. Number two, protect your estate so that there's something left for your heirs. And number 3, a respite for the caregiver. And, I'm sure there's a lot of other reasons, but those are the 3 big ones. And when people are thinking about it, that would be my main challenge.
And to help get through that, too, talking about speaking to your spouse, we had that conversation, too, that just because Linda's diagnosis was a death sentence, there was no assurance that I wouldn't go before her.
Yeah, good point.
And we sat down and decided after we moped around for 2 weeks that we had just wasted 2 weeks of our lives.
After you actually got the diagnosis.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we decided to make every day as good as it could be. A really good day might be able to leave the house and go out to dinner. Another day might be just having the help that we needed come in and having a little dinner by the fireplace. And to make each day just be to its best value that we could make it.
Fantastic.
But you
advice.
can't be reluctant to talk about that. It's the book of life, and if you ignore it, it's going to ambush you.
Absolutely. Great advice, Ed. Thank you so much.
Ed's full of it. You said he was wise, and he has proven himself very wise today. Ed is talking us through a little bit of some long-term care planning and on financial strategies with Scott Wardell this week. Some fun little kind of caveats, quirks in Ed's story. We find out he likes technology. He dabbles in mentoring, so we'll talk about that with Ed coming up on Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell.
How would your financial life improve if you changed just one thing? Avoid ATM fees, make your gifts rather than buy them, protect yourself from identity theft, save more for your family's future. The list goes on. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing. Think about your finances, your lifestyle, your wants versus your needs. What one thing can you change today and see the impact tomorrow? Perhaps your family will save all your change for a month and donate it to charity. Maybe you'll finally write a will. Whether you choose to start simple or take a big step, that one thing can really make a difference. If you heard something today on financial strategies that motivates you to change one thing in your financial life, Thrivent Financial for Lutherans has free tips and resources you can use to do one thing differently. Find more at thrivent.com/one thing.
Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. We're wrapping up this week's edition with guest Ed Del Moro in studio with us today, talking a bit about long-term care planning and sharing Ed's story. And Ed has a lot of fun little details to his story that we get to talk about now.
Yeah, he does. And you said at the close that Ed really has so much wisdom, and it really coming from his experience here as well. So I really appreciate that. So as we're talking about your experience with Linda, and now you're kind of managing through the rest of your retirement, tell our listeners a little bit about the role mentoring has played, in your whole life, but especially now in your retirement.
I find more and more as I get older that I'm befriending young people that are coming up to me at restaurants or parks and places and talking to me and asking me about my life, my career. And I realize when I do a flashback and think of myself at that age, they're searching. They're trying to find out.
Of course.
And I'll eventually ask them what drew them to me. And they say that I look happy and that I enjoy life. And then I tell them my story, and they can't figure out how I can be happy if I've lost my wife.
Yes.
Well, it's because of 41 wonderful years that have made me who I am. And so I always think there's, little ministries in life. And I thought, well, this is a new niche. When I get an opportunity to talk to people, if they want to know about my life, I share. And hopefully they'll find a piece of advice in there that will be a GPS for their life trip.
Fantastic. And I just have to share how I met Ed, because he was working on a community project, and he came by my office and he was looking for a donation for the lights, the snowflakes that were being put up. And I met him. I was impressed. I remember him leaving my office going, this is an exceptional person. This is really something. So then he called back and wanted me to mail in the check. And I would have no part of it. He had to come back to my office because I had to see this man again. It was not going to be in the mail because I was like, wow, I'm pretty curious here. So that's is exactly, the way I've used you as a mentor as well so many times, Ed. So I really appreciate that. And so, and the other thing that just impressed me out of the gate about Ed is I think we were actually having coffee or breakfast one morning, and something came up in the conversation, and I don't even remember what it was, but you said, well, wait a minute, I'll look it up. And I found out that Ed, how old are you now, Ed?
I'm 76.
Ed's 76, and he was kind of running circles around me with his technology. And so, you're really savvy with technology. What advice do you have for other retirees relative to things like technology?
Embrace it. It's a helper. I'll go way back to that first job when I had the stacks of papers on the windowsills.
Yes.
And then suddenly a computer could do that. From that day on, a computer was my friend. Anything that can do work for me and organize things.
Sure.
And so I have never had the fear of the computer. I just think of it, as I said before, as a bunch of little people in there that I'm giving orders to. And so as computers became more and more in the workplace, I've always had that kind of a mind. I probably should have been an efficiency expert. I'm always looking for an easier way to do something well.
Right.
And, I think back to that office job when I had a dial telephone. I used to dial it with a pencil to save the finger.
Sure.
And I think there ought to be a button when I have to redial the same number. I shouldn't have to redial it. I should be able to hit, redial.
You should have patented that one.
I should have.
How many times in your life have you said, I should have patented that?
I thought a typewriter should have a memory so you didn't have to retype the whole letter to change one word. But I was not the inventor.
Yeah, you were probably the only one thinking about it.
But the minute one came out, I embraced it. I went to a class and learned about it, and came back and told the whole world about word processing.
Right.
I was just going to ask, actually, do you teach yourself? Do you go to classes? How do you?
No, I teach myself. I just have, when I see it, I'm just drawn to it. I just somehow know how to do it.
I think Ed learns by playing. I've seen him on his phone, iPad, or not iPad,
Yeah,
iPhone.
I got that too.
You have an iPhone? You have an iPhone and an iPad?
I do.
I am jealous of Ed.
Yeah, and I think you learn by exploring and by playing, and
Right, I dive in, and what's the worst that's going to happen? Reboot,
Exactly.
Are your grandkids taking lessons from you yet?
Well, they're
pretty
pretty savvy. They're growing up with it.
Exactly. And I think it extends to more than just technology for you, because you made some decisions when you retired about, you saw people that retired that you thought, I'm not so sure I want to look that way when I retire.
I remember in high school, or before I got in high school, I used to hear the word commencement.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew they were graduating and leaving the school. And without really thinking about the word, in my mind, it meant an ending. And then I got into high school, and I realized commencement was a beginning. And I wish the word retirement were a different word, because I think people hear retirement as an ending.
Right.
And I always saw it as a beginning. Suddenly the harness was going to be off, and I could go anywhere I wanted in the field. And so I kind of have a wide open look to that, where I want it to be something new and exciting, not a rocking chair and waiting for the grave,
Right.
Can I ask if there's been a highlight for you so far in retirement?
Retirement?
Or commencement, however you want to view it?
I just have been having a really good time. I have met more wonderful people. I've gotten involved with more things. I'm careful and I pick and choose so I don't overextend. But I mean, I've been blessed with very good health, and I know that's one thing that a lot of people have to deal with.
And you've had some pretty fantastic travel as well. I mean, your trip to Italy and connecting with relatives,
Right.
and bringing your family there.
I'm doing the genealogy for the family,
Okay.
so,
Yeah.
He stays very, very active, and that's really, I think, one of the key things. And, so taking care of yourself, as you demonstrated and give people a great example, is more than eating right and exercising. It's about care. I mean, Ed's sitting here this morning in it looks like you pressed your shirt this morning.
He looks incredible.
Of course I did.
Of course you did. Well, it is Saturday.
It doesn't matter when you're retired.
Yeah, that's right.
It's another day, so it's wonderful.
I'm
Right.
waiting for commencement to start pressing my clothes, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So, he has, in fact, treated every one of these phases as a new beginning, a new chapter, and really it's about discovery. And I see you with your family all the time. You've really kept those family connections, just really beautiful and very tight.
It's very important to me. It's always been family first.
Absolutely.
Still is.
Yeah, you've lived the lesson on that one for sure.
Well, we are in the middle of a retirement series here on Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. We've talked about goal setting, assessing where we're at, managing risk. What do we have coming up next, Scott?
Yeah, and just have to reflect one more minute on Ed's story. I mean, this is a great, great story because it's got so many things. And I hope our listeners, when they think about what Ed and Linda did to prepare for a great retirement, I mean, you can't listen to Ed without really feeling the sense of his great attitude about the blessings. And Ed, I don't think you'll mind my sharing. Ed had his car hit twice in 1 week, in this last week, and he's got this beautiful yellow what kind of car?
Sky Roadster.
Yeah, a Sky Roadster. Okay, and in the same week he had both the right and the left side of his car banged into. And he said, your first temptation, this is, again, Ed mentoring Scott.
Yeah.
His first temptation is to be very mad about it. And then a moment, and you reflect, and what was your thought?
It's only tin that can be fixed. Get over it.
Yeah, the car manufacturers wouldn't like you to call that tin.
It's metal.
It's metal. Exactly. So it's only a
it's
door, he said to
fiberglass.
me.
Right,
Absolutely. Right. So thanks for what you shared with us here, your perspective, your attitude, but also your communication with Linda. Fantastic lesson for other people. Communicate with your spouse, and your courage to really talk about the things that others might not want to talk about and actually explore and do your homework.
Yeah.
These are the pieces of a successful retirement, and you're living it. So, I really, my hat is off to you, Ed. It's just fantastic. Your question was about the retirement series here, and next week I have Mike Barrett. Mike is a CPA, and we're really going to dive into taxes on and approaching retirement. So what are the things that you can do as you're approaching your retirement to maybe get your situation set up in such a way that maybe you won't have to pay quite so much in taxes, and then during retirement, because there's a lot of special concerns about taxes during retirement. One is your tax on Social Security. How is it? Are there ways that you might be able to reduce your overall tax as well as the tax on Social Security? What leads up to that? So I know we have a lot of listeners who are thinking about those ways in which to produce more income and reduce expenses, and taxes is a big one. So Ed, thank you one more time for joining us here today. And our listeners, I hope they will take you as an example, and they'll call that phone number to at least start the process of doing their homework. It is 952-400-0545.
Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. Thanks a lot again to Ed and Scott. We'll see you next week.
We hope you've enjoyed the past hour of Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell. While various products may be discussed during the course of this program, please note that these discussions are intended only to educate you about financial topics. They are broad in scope and do not consider your individual personal financial situation. You should work with a qualified financial professional in collaboration with your attorney and tax advisor before implementing any financial decisions which will affect your personal financial situation. Thrivent financial representatives cannot provide legal or tax advice. Your local Thrivent representatives are Wayne Grunkley and Alan Sogstead, 215 Atlantic Avenue, Morris. Call 589-1731. Join us again next week for Financial Strategies with Scott Wardell on KMRS Morris.